கண்டுபிடிக்கப்படவில்லை. இருந்தபோதிலும் காணாமல் போன தமது உறவினர்கள் கண்டுபிடிக்கப்படுவார்கள் என்ற நம்பிக்கையையும் எதிர்பார்ப்பையும் மக்கள் சுமந்து கொண்டே வாழ்ந்தனர். பிரிவினையின் கொடூரத்தில் தங்கள் வாழ்வை இழந்து இடப்பெயர்வால் ஏற்பட்ட வலியை அனுபவித்த பல லட்சக்கணக்கான இந்தியர்களுக்கு வீர வணக்கங்கள்.
Thank you, CBC Chennai. Professor A.S. Narang. Professor Amarjit Singh Narang, retired professor of political science and former registrar at Indira Gandhi National Open University, did his master's and PhD political science from University of Delhi. With 45 years of experience as a teacher and researcher, he taught courses from BA to PhD levels at Delhi University, JNU and IGNOU, and in institutions and universities abroad. Professor Narang has published and edited 10 books and about 65 papers. Professor Narang has served on various committees constituted by UGC and other bodies concerned with higher education and NCERT. He has been on the editorial board of several national and international journals. We welcome Professor Amarjit Singh Narang to address the gathering.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Honorable Governor of Tamil Nadu and Chair of this meeting, Thiru J.K. Arora, IAS, Thiru Sanjeev Sanyal, Thiru R. Kirlosh Kumar, IAS, Professor V. Kamakoti, ladies and gentlemen. Time with me is very short, therefore I'm skipping all the formal niceties and coming straight to the issue. You have just now seen in somewhat detail the horrors and a little background of why partition and how partition helped. Okay. I'm sure Shri J.S. Arora himself, an eyewitness and a victim of that horror, will you tell about these horrors in much detail. I am, as a background of my presentation, which is primarily on fixation of responsibilities, I'm starting with recapitulation of these events in a very brief time. As you have already seen, there was lots of migrations here and there. I'm going to much detail, but just a little bit of data. As for various studies, data from refugee camps and census, total number of migrants on both sides is estimated over 12 million people. According to 1951 census of India, 2% of India's population was refugee. This constituted about 1.3% coming from West Punjab to India and 0.7 points from East Bengal to Bengal. So this is from. It is estimated that between 1 to 2 million were slaughtered. Thousands, including children and women, went missing and families were torn out. The women were most tragic victims. They were abducted and raped. Many were forced to convert their religion and marry the very men who might have slaughtered their families. That was the tragedy. To save their honor, many jumped into wells. In addition, their own family members often undertook to kill them. Their own family members killed women to save the honors of the family. I'm not going into detail with the stories too much, and further, Mr. Arora will tell you much about that because he is the eyewitness. Coming to the important issue of fixing the responsibility for such horrified event and learning the lessons, let me start making it clear that whatever some researchers and historians of different shades may suggest, it is beyond doubt that the major responsibility lies with British imperial policies and short-sighted communal politics of Muslim League. Of course, our own national movement leaders also could not properly perceive and deal with the events. The British colonial administration, right from the beginning, to consolidate and maintain their rule, had played the game of divide and rule. They made potential use of religious and caste divisions and rural-urban differences. Bengal and Punjab were their special concerns. Both these provinces, despite heterogeneous population, were attached to Bengali and Punjabi nationalism as part of broad anti-imperial nationalism. More important, as the time was passing on, Punjab and Bengal was emerging as hubs of revolutionary anti-imperial struggle. Therefore, the Britishers were much concerned. As part of the divide and rule policy, the Britishers in 1905 divided Bengal on communal lines. Of course, they had to reunite it after popular pressure. Then, in 1906, British officials played very open and active role in establishment of Muslim League in Dhaka. This is on what I'm saying is on record. One can check. I can give you the names also. So, and then throughout, after establishment of Muslim League, throughout during constitutional reforms and the other things, they kept on making policies based on division, both on caste as well as community, making them reservations, separate electorate, etc., etc. So that was what. Then, in post-Second War situation, that is after 1945, at the time of division, realizing that it was time to quit the Britishers' covertly supported division to maintain for themselves, watch it, strategic base in Northwest South Asia that could guard their interests in the Middle East. That is after Second World War. They knew that now we are going and they need some base, and which till today they are looking in Pakistan. Sorry to say that, but that's fact. The Muslim League leadership, which came from urban elite classes, apart from serving the British divide and rule design, also saw for themselves green pastures and green pastures in an independent Islamic state. The elite, they were not masses. So I'm distinguishing between Muslim masses and Muslim elite. The leadership of the Muslim League, mind it, I'm very clear about that. Therefore, while in early years of national movement, that was concerned more with constitutional reforms and concessions, the League could cooperate with Indian National Congress. But from 1920s, with the demand of self-rule and complete independence coming to fore, they began to drift away from Congress, moving to the theory of two nations. And that culminated in 1930 first informally, and in 1940 formally to the demand of Pakistan. I'm not going to detail which states they wanted. Bengal and Punjab, though Muslim majority provinces, were inhabited by substantial minority population. Bengal had about 46% Hindus against 54% Muslims, and Punjab about 29% Hindus and 15% Sikhs against 53% of Muslims. Both Hindus and Sikhs were dead against the idea of their subjugation in an Islamic state. The situation in Punjab was more complex. For Sikhs, it was their homeland and holy land, and also they possessed a normal landed property there. And there also was in a small number compared to other communities. Added to this, it is very important to see this point, added to this in Punjab, the Muslim League did not have much local support from the Muslims themselves. At that time, the Muslims of Punjab supported the Unionist Party, a coalition of Muslim, Hindu, and Sikh organizations. In 1937 provincial elections, the Unionist Party won 95 out of total 175 seats, including 73 of 86 Muslim seats. The Muslim League won just 2 seats in Punjab. Just 2 seats in Punjab they won. And obviously Unionist Party, being a coalition of all three agricultures, was against the demand of Pakistan. In the given situation, in due course, to win mass support for themselves, the Muslim League raised the cry of Islam in danger. It became theocratic movement rather than a political movement. So it was primarily to, they resorted to crude religious symbolism to win over the innocent, simplistic rural inhabitants, which naturally most of them were Muslims. The League propagandists used the mosques in the countryside as their launching pad, and regular League meetings followed the Friday prayers with Imam's permission. More serious, the League had succeeded in winning over the many peers and Maulvis all over the countryside in Punjab to their cause, and these peers and Maulvis singled out the opponents of the League as infidels, what they called kafirs. The Holy Quran was carried everywhere as an emblem of the League. The preachers even went to the extent of declaring that every vote cast in favor of the League was a vote for the Holy Prophet. They went up to this extent. In some places, Maulvis and peers preached that those voting against the League would be excommunicated from the religion. That was the seriousness debate. In 1942, with the announcement of Quit India resolution, most of the Congress leaders was put in jail up to 1945. And this gave Jinnah an unchecked field to say whatever he wants. In Jinnah's words himself, the war which no one welcomed proved to be a blessing in disguise. During wartime, the Muslim League was free because all nationalist leaders was in jail. Just a minute. No problem. Take it. So the result was astonishing. In 1946 provincial elections, the Muslim League was victorious in 75 out of 86 Muslim seats, as against just 2 seats in 1937. This was because of the religious propaganda, not political propaganda. The unions were reduced to 15 seats only, yet Muslim League could not get majority in Punjab. While in Bengal, Muslim League got majority and formed the government, and in Punjab they could not form the government. From the end of war up till 1947, the Muslim League created a deadlock in almost all negotiations between parties, communities, and the government. Initiated by British officials, they talked with Sikhs to persuade them to accept the demand of Pakistan with favorable conditions. Jinnah said, join Pakistan, we'll give you this, that. To the Sikhs they offered, but these failed very badly. Just to quote one sentence statement by a very strong Sikh leader, Baba Khadak Singh. He declared, so long as even one Sikh child is alive, Pakistan will not be allowed to be established, and Hindustan will remain Akhand Hindustan. This was Sikh's response to Jinnah's. So naturally, I'm coming to the end. So naturally, the desperate Jinnah asked Britishers to against the Congress demand, quit India. He demanded divide and quit. And he announced 16th August 1946 as Direct Action Day, making a very provocative statement. We will either have a divided India or destroyed India. That was his statement written. So on 16th August 1946 was observed Direct Action Day. In Calcutta, on that day, 16th August 1946, a huge gathering assembled, and after observing the Direct Action Day, that was addressed by Muslim League Chief Minister Shoravardi, the Muslims on return started attacking Hindus in apparently pre-planned manner. Obviously, next day the Hindus obviously struck back, and during 4 days of violence, about 4,000 persons were butchered and over 11,000 injured. The event is mentioned in history as Great Calcutta Killing 1946. So that was end of everything. The situation almost turned to be a civil war. Congress was left with no choice but to accept partition, and Muslim League and the Britishers were left with no choice but to accept the demand for division of Punjab and Bengal. Mind it, in original design, both Punjab and Bengal were supposed to go to Pakistan because they were Muslim majority provinces. But these were the sacrifices of patriot Hindus and Sikhs in Bengal and Punjab that saved these significant parts of these two provinces for India. And for this sacrifice, they paid the price which you have just now read. I'm not going to repeat it. Just in one line, I'm concluding. Although some scholars question, while previous communal riots had been deadly, the scale and level of brutality during the partition massacres were unprecedented. There are numerous eyewitness accounts. Mr. Arora will just tell you now of maiming and mutilation of victims. The catalog of horrors include the disemboweling of pregnant women, the slamming of babies' heads against brick walls, the cutting of the victims' limbs and genitalia, and displaying of the heads of corpses. So that was the situation which we forced. Those who have seen and those who have seen in photos can imagine what the horror was. Therefore, it is for us to pay our tributes to those innocent martyrs and learn the lessons that religion cannot be a divisive force, particularly dividing the countries, because ultimately it results nothing. And Pakistan itself could not sustain itself on the communal basis. Ultimately, in 1971, the same Muslims asked for a separate country from Pakistan. So these are some of the important lessons. Thank you for your patience. And
thank you, sir. Thiru J.K. Arora, former Additional Chief Secretary and Development Commissioner, Government of Karnataka. Thiru J.K. Arora, born in 1939 in Darjada, which is now in Pakistan. Forced to leave his home at the age of 8, he, along with his family, embarked on a harrowing 240 kilometers journey to India. Over the next 3 decades, the family faced hardship. Mr. Arora graduated from DAV College, Dehradun. In 1962, moved by a sense of duty after the Chinese aggression, he joined the Indian Army and trained at the Officers Training School in Madras, now Chennai. Later, in 1969, he joined the prestigious Indian Administrative Service with seniority from 1964 and was allotted to the state of Mysore, now Karnataka. Throughout his illustrious career, he held significant roles in the government of Karnataka and government of India, ultimately retiring in 1997 as Additional Chief Secretary and Development Commissioner for the government of Karnataka. We welcome you, sir, to address the gathering.
Excellency, Governor of Tamil Nadu, Shri R.N. Ravi ji, Shri Sanyal ji, Professor Amarjit Singh ji, Dr. Kamakoti ji, Shri Kirlosh ji, and Shri Palnichami ji, distinguished guests, esteemed faculty of IIT Madras, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. On 14th August 2021, our Honorable Prime Minister declared that this date would be observed every year as Partition Horrors Day, Remembrance Day. That was to remind the nation of the suffering and sacrifice of millions during 1947. He also said, "May the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day keep reminding us of the need to remove the poison and social divisions and disharmony in our society." Some may feel that we should not go on remembering past traumas, as our succeeding generations should not become prisoners of the past. In my view, we should keep remembering the horrors of partition and the causes thereof over and over again, not to avenge them, but to ensure that our future generations do not go through such horrors. In any case, communities that suffer the traumas do not forget them. As they get transmitted from generation to generation, both genetically and through history, sometimes even through our very being, like I'm standing before you. The real question is not whether we remember, but how we remember. We can remember in a way that breeds resentment, or in a way that builds compassion, resilience, and unity. Objective of observing the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day has been clearly spelled out by our Honorable Prime Minister himself. He was obviously aware of the need to remove the poison of social divisions and disharmony in our society, for which perhaps he thought partition was one of the mainly responsible event. For the responsibility of that event is primarily because of the division of India. The partition was one of the largest forced migrations in human history, marked by massacres, displacement, and unimaginable human suffering. About 15 million people were uprooted, an estimated 1 to 2 million were killed, and lakhs were found missing. They were never accounted for. Women were abducted, raped, humiliated, and in many cases, they took their own lives to protect their honor. Today, I wish to share, not as a student of history, but as a survivor, what my family endured for almost 3 decades after partition. I would also like my younger generations, and many of whom are present here, to read a few books and watch movies which depict these horrors more graphically than I can do. I was 8 years old, living in a small village called Dera Jada in Sargodha district in West Punjab, which is now in Pakistan. As children, we knew little of independence or borders. Until one day, my father told us to pile brickbats on the rooftop because they were expecting some trouble to come, and we should be prepared for that. Soon thereafter, in a couple of days, we were rushed into a truck and we headed to Sargodha town, which was the district headquarters and considered a little safer than the village. Our relatives and friends from surrounding villages also joined us because they were also fleeing from the turbulence and the trouble that they were facing in those villages. With great difficulty and with the help of one of my father's friends, Mr. Firoz Khan Noon, who later on became the Prime Minister of Pakistan also, we managed to get a special goods train consisting of open wagons, not a normal passenger train, which is normally used to transport heavy materials like iron and steel, for all our friends and relations numbering about 500. Unfortunately, during the short journey of about 240 kilometers from Sargodha railway station to Atari, our first railway station on Indian borders, I lost one of my elder brothers in transit and a cousin. The bodies were kept on one single pyre and cremated without anyone performing any last rites. There were also many more deaths among our relations and fellow passengers. Our elders were quite sure that things will settle down soon and we'll go back to our village back in Pakistan. But seeing, and with the passage of time and seeing the massacres that was taking place of the people who were traveling to and fro between India and Pakistan, they realized that it may not be possible for them to go back. We were now faced with the question of finding a place for settling down. We initially camped at various open spaces, railway platforms, and under the trees. For almost 4 years, we moved from one place to another place to find a place where we could settle down. My father refused to go to any refugee camps, and he said, "You have 2 arms, you should do labor, do whatever comes your way to survive. You will not go and stay in any refugee camp." During that period, we went through extreme hardships, and all of us did odd jobs to survive. We finally landed in a small town in western UP. It's called Deoband. I don't know, many of you might have heard. It has the biggest Muslim seminary in India, and it has also a school of Deobandi thought, as some of you may be knowing about it. We lived in a very small house with no electricity, no water for almost over 2 decades. We survived. That's why I'm here before you. Some of our relations could not sustain the prolonged struggle against the adversity, and they are still leading life of misery. Most Punjabi families those days lived in well-knit close communities, which we used to call them biradari. I don't know whether you are familiar with the word biradari. Biradari is nothing else but informal groupings of friends and relations who are living close by in the villages, 4 or 5 villages around you. And that was a safety net for all the members of this biradari. And families supported each other in times of difficulties, and also they shared responsibilities during marriages, etc. They'll all pool up their resources and share the financial burden also of the families performing these ceremonial rituals. And that is perhaps the reason that we all came together in one single train, 500 members of our brotherhood. After coming to India, we continued to be in touch with each other for a long time, for many, many years. Even though when they were living in different cities of northern India and elsewhere. Unfortunately, with the departure of senior members of this brotherhood, the brotherhood itself disintegrated, and now each one is for himself. We have now become almost rootless families. Whenever I meet my brothers and sisters, we invariably talk about our days of hardships and how we could cope up with those challenging times. We have never felt any anger against anyone or blamed anyone for those traumas, but we have also not forgotten them. I hope that our children and grandchildren will not carry the burden of our traumas, but communities and the nation do not and should not forget such horrors. Unfortunately, we as a nation are still going through the sufferings caused mainly by the partition. While remembering the horrors of partition, I am also reminded of the kindness of some of our Muslim friends who escorted us to safety from our village to Sargodha city. In fact, almost 200 able young Muslim men, armed with whatever they could, with lathis and swords or whatever, they escorted all our Hindu and Sikh families from our village to the safety of the district headquarters, which was about 20 kilometers away, to ensure that we are not attacked en route by the Muslims there was all disturbances going on. So we can't forget this. And also we can't forget the help given by Mr. Firoz Khan Noon, who arranged a special train for us. I'm sure there were many Hindus in India who would have similarly helped their Muslim friends during their emigration to Pakistan. I'm sure there were many stories about them also. The two nations theory that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together in one country as they are separate nations was the main reason for division of India. This has had lasting impact on the relations between India and Pakistan. I think India has disproved this theory because Indian Muslims do not wish to leave India as they enjoy equal rights and opportunities like other citizens of India. On the contrary, look at Pakistan, which not only broke into two nations in 1971, but what they have done to their own countries, particularly to their minorities. The manner in which borders between the two countries were decided and the lack of proper planning to ensure that migration of populations and their rehabilitation in their new countries was done in an orderly manner were to a large extent responsible for the horrors and sufferings. The problem of Kashmir is another legacy of the partition, which continues to be the cause of hostile relations between our two countries. Your generation, bright minds of IIT Madras, will shape the India of 2047, our centenary of independence. The India you build must be one where differences are not erased but respected, where diversity is not a weakness but a strength, where political debate never crosses the line into social rupture. If we can remember the horrors of partition and still choose compassion over division, resilience over bitterness, truth over propaganda, then and only then will we truly honor those millions whose lives were torn apart. Thanks for your kind attention. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thiru Sanjeev Sanyal, Member Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister. Thiru Sanjeev Sanyal is an Indian economist and writer. He started his career in financial markets in the mid-90s. He was the global strategist and managing director at Deutsche Bank. He was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship in 2007 for his work on urban dynamics. In 2010, Sanyal was named Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. He received the inaugural International Indian Achievers Award in 2014 for contributions to literature. He was appointed the Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India, led by the Honorable Prime Minister Thiru Narendra Modi in 2017. Thiru Sanyal has also written several books. Some of his best-selling works include Land of the Seven Rivers, The Indian Renaissance, and The Ocean of Churn. We welcome our chief guest, Thera Sanjeev Sanyal, to deliver the keynote address.
Good afternoon, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking the Honorable Governor Ravi and IIT Madras for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak about partition horrors, Remembrance Day, because this is, of course, one of the major events of the 20th century, and I myself I'm a descendant from my mother's side of refugees from East Bengal. So it is, of course, something quite personal for me. Indeed, when most Indians think of 15th of August, they tend to think of it with unalloyed joy. But for those of us from the partition states of Punjab and Bengal, but also you must remember from the lost provinces as well, Sindh, Northwest Frontier Province, Balochistan, and also Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, that for us, 15th of August is not entirely a day of unalloyed joy, because on the very day that most of India became free, many of us actually lost our homes. We became foreigners in the very land on which our ancestors had lived. Now, a lot of ground has already been covered, so I'm going to take a somewhat different tack, and as you will see as I go on, I'm going to focus a little bit more on Bengal, not just because I'm Bengali, but some part of what the experience of the other side, the western side, has already been covered. So I'm going to cover mostly about the experience of the eastern side of what happened in East Bengal. Now, the reason this is important to remember, not merely because, we don't want to repeat this, but there is another angle to this, and which is that much of what happened is related to the way great powers think and how they act in order to protect their own interests, something that we actually face even today as we are going through a major turmoil in the global order. And as you will see, there has many implications to what you're seeing around you right now. Now, you will all know that the British faced a major shock in 1857-58 because of the Great Revolt. Subsequent to that, the British authorities were always very afraid that there may be another Great Revolt. So what they did is their intelligence services systematically invested heavily in basically infiltrated, in fact, preempting and creating political, cultural, and other institutions which the Indians may use to find expression. So to give you some examples, in 1885, the Indian National Congress was actually set up as an intelligence operation by somebody called Alan Octavian Hume. So you have to remember that the Congress was actually set up as an intelligence operation in order to provide a safety valve, not my words, their words. In quite the same way, they began to invest into other things as well. One of the things they invested into also was consequently in taking control of expressions of Muslim identity. So many of you may be aware of the Aligarh movement, and it is usually associated with Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and his modernist approach. However, what is often forgotten is that the real person who ran that Aligarh movement was actually not Muslim himself, but somebody called Theodore Beck, who was a Quaker Christian. Indeed, the British were doing this systematically across the country, which includes this part of the country. And this is the context in which, by the way, you should look at the works of people like Robert Cadwell, for example. Unless you know this, you do not understand what they were doing. So this is the reason that the second half of the 19th century was actually oddly peaceful, So, of course, there were some occasional rebellions in Manipur by the tribals and so on. But because the British had essentially infiltrated every expression of Indian identity and were guiding it, the late 19th century actually did not see very major threats to British rule. So it's only in the very first decade of the 20th century that you begin to see a real concerted pushback against the British. And it is led by many people, of course, were there, but three important people. The Lal Bal Pal trio, Lala Lajpat Rai of Punjab, Bal Gangadhar Tilak of Maharashtra, and Bipin Chandra Pal of Bengal. Now, one of the tragedies is, today, not many people, even in Bengal, remember Bipin Chandra Pal, but he was a real firebrand. They also don't remember another character who was very important, Aurobindo Ghosh. He's now remembered as Sri Aurobindo of Pondicherry and almost seen as a Gandhian character, which he absolutely was not. He was actually the founder of the Anushilan Samiti, which is the armed revolutionary movement against the British. So the reason he ended up in Pondicherry is because he was hiding from the British in a French enclave. That's why he was there. So there was this huge pushback against the British, which began in the beginning of the 20th century. And it really got sparked by the first partition of Bengal in 1905 by Lord Curzon, which was an openly political move, essentially to divide the Hindus and Muslims of Bengal. And both communities saw through it. And so there was a big upsurge and a pushback against this. And so there was a huge amount of nationalist fervor at that time. And in fact, the opposition to the partition of Bengal of 1905 actually saw protests all over the country, including here in southern India. Now, as a response to this, the British realized that they hadn't gone deep enough in trying to subvert Indian national voice. So it was with their thinking and their intelligence operations that really in 1906 you saw the foundation of the All India Muslim League in Dhaka. This was derived directly from the Aligarh movement, which I told you was already run by them. And about at the same time, incidentally, they were doing this in other communities as well. So people should not forget that they were also infiltrating the Sikh Gurudwaras at exactly the same time to undermine the Gadarites, who were also revolutionaries, allied in fact with the Anushilan Samiti. And the place they did it, interestingly, is where they started doing this was not in India, but in Canada. So the first place they infiltrated the Gurudwaras was in Canada, where again, an intelligence officer whose name we know, Hopkinson, infiltrated the Gadarite Sikh Gurudwaras in order to undermine the Gadarite revolutionaries. So we actually know the origins of the Khalistan movement is actually in Canada, and its founder is actually this agent called Hopkinson. So this was the environment in which, as you can see, the divide and rule approach of the British was used. It is important to remember this because all great powers do this and they continue to do this. And I'll come to that later. Now, what is interesting is that in the initial phase, the All India Muslim League was not asking actually for independence. They didn't expect it. So it's only in the 1930s, in fact, specifically in 1933, when a young student called Chaudhry Rahmat Ali, who was a student in Cambridge in the UK, who actually coined the word Pakistan, which is actually an acronym. So till this point, the Muslim League had not even come up with a name for this homeland they wanted. And it's 1933, and imagine just within 14 years, they had already had a new country in their possession. How did that happen so quickly? And it happened because of the circumstances of the end of the Second World War. You have to know exactly what is going on, otherwise you won't understand why the British did what they did with partition. You see, even in 1945, the Muslim League did not seriously think they would actually get a separate country. But what was happening is that at the end of the Second World War, the Allies were under tremendous pressure to send all their soldiers back. So the British soldiers, Australian soldiers, American soldiers, all wanted to go home. They were, millions of them had come out of giving up their careers and whatever they would do, become soldiers, fought for 5 years, they were tired, they wanted to go home. And here in Asia, what happened is that as these allied soldiers began to go home, they left behind a huge area in the control of professional soldiers of the British Indian Army. So, everything from Egypt, across the Middle East, through the Indian subcontinent, of course, through Burma, the Malay Peninsula, later became Malaysia, through what became Indonesia, but was then called the Dutch East Indies, through Vietnam, in fact, even part of Japan, was actually controlled by the British Indian Army. But there was a problem. The problem was that there was always a hint that there may be a huge rebellion in this British Indian Army. And this became a serious issue when the soldiers of the Indian National Army were put on trial and caused quite a stir. Because remember, during the war, nobody knew about the Indian National Army because of a blackout on information. And in this sort of charged up environment, there were a number of revolts. One of them, of course, began to happen in Indonesia, where you begin to see Indian soldiers actually switch over, in some cases, to the Indonesian side. But the big revolt that happened was actually in Bombay, called the Great Naval Revolt of 1946. In February of 1946, there was a huge revolt. 20,000 sailors of the the Royal Indian Navy revolted, took control of ships, and it became quite apparent to the British that they were going to lose control of the Indian Armed Forces. And remember, throughout all of this, they are scared that Subhash Chandra Bose may turn up suddenly and take control of the whole thing. Why is this an issue? Because you see, they were scared that they may have defeated the Japanese and the Germans, but if the British Indian Army got a proper leadership, they would have effectively gifted to India a gigantic empire, going from Egypt all the way through to Vietnam. So they were really scared at this point, and then of course this revolt happened. So it's in the middle of the Royal Indian Navy revolt that the Cabinet Commission on Indian Independence was announced. But of course they were very, very clear throughout this that they couldn't possibly leave behind a united India and a united Indian armed forces. So, not surprisingly, they began to encourage the Muslim League to demand even more strongly division of India. And so, just a few months after the Royal Indian Navy revolt, this is in August of 1946, Jinnah called for Direct Action Day. And he said, and you heard a previous speaker talked about, he said, threatened that if it was not going to be a divided India, it was going to be a destroyed India. Now remember this language in the context of what very recently General Munir just said in the US. It's the same language, the same thinking. It's not by chance. This is exactly the same thinking process going on even today. Now, I'm going to carry on past independence, the partition. But before I get there, remember what happens within a few days of Jinnah's Direct Action Day call. On 16th of August, the most senior-most Muslim politician in Bengal, Suhrawardi, basically makes a very inflammatory series of speeches and essentially lets loose a series of massacres. This leads to several days of massacres in Kolkata called the Calcutta Killings, the Great Calcutta Killings, in which between 4,000 and 10,000 people get killed. This triggers a series of other massacres, most notably in Noakhali, as some of you may also know. So by this point, very quickly now, the atmosphere had got poisoned to such an extent that it became quite obvious that there was no choice but to have a partition. Now, while Suhrawardi was doing all of this, the question is, what were the Hindu leaders of Bengal doing? This is also very interesting. Now, who were the most senior Hindu leaders in Bengal? One was Sarat Bose, who was Netaji's elder brother and a famous person in his own right. Sarat Bose, interestingly, was given the offer by Suhrawardi that they could somehow, instead of going into Pakistan, create an independent Bengal in its own right. This is now completely forgotten out of your textbooks, but this was the offer the Suhrawardi made to Sarat Bose, that we will not join, Bengal will not join Pakistan or India, but will become an independent country with Sarat Bose as the president and himself as the prime minister. And Sarat Bose, rather than taking up whatever the issues were, particularly the issues that the Hindus of East Bengal were facing, he basically spent most of his time trying to pursue this direction. Similarly, the leader of what we now call the Dalits, but is then more widely called the scheduled caste community of Bengal, Jogendranath Mandal, he actually largely sided, interestingly, with the demand for Pakistan. And in return for that, he actually became the first law minister of Pakistan. So, ironically, when partition happened, of course, there was a big exchange of population, but in Bengal, a sizable population of Hindus continued to live in East Bengal. So, unlike in Punjab and the western side, there was no neat exchange of population. A significant Hindu population continued to live there. And of course, as I said, Jogendranath Mandal was the law minister and projected himself as kind of the leader of the Hindus in Pakistan. But within a couple of years, he realized what a bad situation it was, because the riots continued, and he himself resigned and actually came away to India, leaving behind the Hindus, particularly the scheduled castes, who he claimed to be the leader of, to be essentially slaughtered in East Bengal. And this has continued to this day. So through the 50s and 60s, large numbers of riots happened. My own family, by the way, who lived in Kushtia, did not come away in 1947, but in fact in the 1950s. And one branch of the family actually continued to live there till 1970-71. And so this, instead of there being one sort of sudden partition, in the eastern side it was a gradual and very painful thing. So when people say that, 1 or 2 million people, actually it is much more, because you have to take into account what happens later, particularly in what happens in the run-up to the 1970-71 war, where the West Pakistan Army carried out series of massacres in East Bengal. 10 million, I repeat, 10 million Bengalis came as refugees into India. 3 million were killed. And the bulk of that, by the way, were Hindus, although some Muslims were also a part of that. But the bulk of that were Hindus. So this continued partition pain in the eastern side has continued after that. So what was at partition 28% of the population of East Bengal was Hindu, has today now dropped to only 8%, but they're still there, 8%. And since the last year's events, as you know, and the taking over of the country by the army-backed regime, an Islamist regime, as most of you will be aware of Chief Advisor Yunus, the condition of the Hindus in East Bengal has become very, very bad. It's almost like being back in the days of the 1950s and 60s. But let me also add here, before I end, that these refugees, even if they made it to India, faced a very, very difficult situation. Very difficult situation. So let me tell you a little bit about what happened to those who actually made it. In 1971, as I said, 10 million Hindu refugees came into India, not just West Bengal, they all went to Assam and Tripura and so on. And, of course, many of them did not want to go back to East Bengal even after Bangladesh liberation. So, many of them were settled in various places. Unfortunately, they were very often settled in places like, forested areas like in Jharkhand and Odisha and so on, and they didn't want to live there, and they all wanted to go back to Bengal, where, there was linguistically or there were other things that they would prefer to stay. But of course, there was no place to keep them. So in 1977, something interesting happened, is that a left-front government came to power in Bengal. This was led by Jyoti Basu, Chief Minister, but by the CPM, CPIM, and a party called the Revolutionary Socialist Party, which was in some ways a leftover of the Anushilan, one part of the Anushilan Samiti which had gone left over the years. And this was largely representing the interests of these East Bengali refugees. This was also a part of that left-wing coalition, and they came to power. So when they came to power, they basically, as a result of pressure from the RSP, the left-front government actually invited back many of these Bengalis from the other parts of India to come back to West Bengal and settle. So many of them did turn up, but when they turned up in West Bengal, they found that actually they were not welcome and no arrangements had been made for them. So one group of them, about a few lakh of them, turned up and settled in a small island called Morijhapi at the edge of the Sundarban forests. Now, this caused a big problem politically for Jyoti Basu, because although the RSP was a part of his coalition, the turning up of all these refugees, and they were really desperate, you remember, they were desperate refugees. They had left behind everything, first in East Bengal, then they had been not properly settled, and then they had turned up in this island. The island didn't have anything in it, really. Desperately poor people on this island in Morijhapi. But Jyoti Basu decided that having RSP supporters congregating in this island would cause a disbalance in his own CPM support base. So he actually had that island surrounded by the police and started an eviction drive, which led to something called the Morijhapi massacre. They surrounded the place, they poisoned the wells, they stopped food, and as a result of which, large numbers of men, women, and very young babies died in that massacre. It's the largest massacre in independent India carried out by the state. And it was done to poor Bengali Hindu refugees from East Bengal by the Indian state itself. Nobody knows how many people died in the Morijhapi massacre, but something between 4,000 and 10,000 people died in the Morijhapi massacre. So the reason I want to tell you this is East Bengal refugees, decades after partition, suffered these kinds of atrocities in independent India. And this should never be forgotten. And this process has not even ended to this day. As I just pointed out to you, just last year, East Bengal, what is now called Bangladesh, saw another regime change backed by foreign powers, which has led yet again to the position of East Bengal Hindus into a very dire situation. So we should remember this, because this can happen yet again, not just to those people in East Bengal, not just to those who were in West Punjab or Sindh. It can happen right here, even in the southern tip of India. Be aware that as we rise as a global power, the existing global powers, even those who claim to be our friends, will look on us with great suspicion and make every effort to trip us. So we have to remain united, and we have to remain very, very suspicious of those who try to divide us. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we now humbly request the Honorable Governor to felicitate our eminent guest speakers. The Honorable Governor will now felicitate our Chief Guest, Thiru Sanjeev Sanyal, Member, Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister, amidst a good round of applause. Thank you, sir. The Honorable Governor will now felicitate Thiru J.K. Arora, former Additional Chief Secretary and Development Commissioner, Government of Karnataka. Thiru J.K. Arora will now be felicitated by the Honorable Governor. Thank you, sir. We now request the Honorable Governor to felicitate Professor Amarjeet Singh Narang, retired Professor of Political Science and former Registrar at Indira Gandhi National Open University. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Governor will now felicitate the cultural team led by Thiru J. Kamaraj, IAS Director, Central Bureau of Communication, whose performance on Partition Horrors will be witnessed by us within a short while from now. Good round of applause. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we now humbly request the Honorable Governor to address the gathering.
Distinguished dignitaries on the dais, all the eminent citizens present here, and my dear young friends, students. At the outset, I'd like to thank the three speakers who gave detailed account of the facets of partition, the history of it, what led up to partition, in the run-up to partition, and even post-partition after that, what all has been happening. Friends, at the very outset, I would like to thank the Honorable Prime Minister for thinking of it as starting a Remembrance Day about an event that was so shattering. Never in the history of Bharat, over 5,000-year history of Bharat, such a thing had happened. 20 to 30 lakhs people were massacred. Several crores people were uprooted from their homes, where their ancestors for generations, for hundreds and thousands of years, they lived there. It was their land. But overnight, they became unacceptable. And they had to leave in the most traumatic situations. Over 100,000 girls and women were abducted, forcibly converted. Now, such country, Bharat, was severed. Now, what could be more significant to remember than such an event? You know, friends, the country or society, those who do not remember their tragedies, they will be condemned to repeat it again and again. Look at China. When the British annexed the Hong Kong for trading opium in 1839-40, And when the Japanese sacked Nanking, Chinese continued teaching even till today the century of humiliation. They call about sacking of Nanking, they call rape of Nanking. This is the chapter in the Chinese school and college history. If you do not remember what happened to you, how we were humiliated, how we were tortured, how we were traumatized, it is shameful. And it took 74 years after independence for a prime minister to start this day. And there are people who question it. Why are we talking about it? Friends, there are several questions. Why did the partition happen? Of course, we have blamed the British. Rightly so. But did they create the partition, or they exploited a situation that was created by our people? Is partition a thing of the past, that it is over? Have the wounds of partition been healed, or they are still bleeding? And can we say there will not be any partition hereafter with confidence? Now, these are very relevant questions. Why did the partition happen? It's very easy to say, okay, British did it. Yes, they exploited a situation. But we had a set of people here who called that Muslim as is a nation which cannot coexist with others. They had a concept of kafir. And kafir, with kafir, they cannot exist. Kafirs are hated. Kafirs have to be kept at a distance. Now, what happened, how tragic it was, we saw this a small clipping. We also heard the living witnesses and those who were descendants of the victims. Friends, while it is important to remember such a tragic incident in our history, nation's history, which never happened in our 5,000 years of civilization, because Bharat was built on a philosophy that we are all members of a family. Vasudhaiva kutumbakam, mama atma sarva bhuta atma. We are all members of one family. Individual, society, the world, creation, all are manifestation of the same divine. Diversity is liberated. More the merrier. A flower has numerous colored petals, is beautiful. Imagine a monocolor flower, and imagine a flower with multiple colored petals. This is Bharat. This is the organizing principle of Bharat, which built it, sustained it for over 5,000 years. And when somebody comes, a set of people comes with a notion of others, that kafirs and non-kafirs, this is a poison in the body polity or body social of Bharat or body culture of Bharat. Question is the partition thing of the past? We have heard our eminent speaker Sanjeev Sanyalji mention about how it is continuing. What happened to those who at the time, those who were uprooted and they somehow managed to escape? At that time, they came, they had They suffered a lot for generations, for decades. But at least they were accepted as Indian citizens. But what happened thereafter? Time and again, both from the east and the west, and more from the east, waves after waves, when persecution happens of non-Muslims, they all came in hordes. Be it 65, 71, 1992, even last year. At the time when Pakistan was created, in East Pakistan, there were 4 crore 20 lakhs population. Of the 4 crore 20 lakhs population, 33% were non-Muslims. Today they are 8%. Where did this 24, 25% go? Majority of them were massacred, they were converted. Several thousand of them, they escaped seeking refuge in this land. And they remained stateless till the other day. They were not treated as Indian citizens. What was their fault? What was their fault? It was their land. For hundreds and thousands of years, hundreds of generations had lived there. And suddenly they were told that no, you are kafir and they will not, you just can't live with them. And they had to live, leaving behind everything. And here, Bharat, which organizing principle of which is all inclusive, we are all members of a family, we refuse to give them citizenship. Why? It took the present government of Prime Minister Modi, to come up with Citizenship Amendment Act and ensure that these citizens, those of our people, those who have come, not they have come on their own, they have escaped, saved their life, leaving everything behind. Partition is an ongoing phenomenon. What is happening in Jammu and Kashmir? For the last 78 years, Pakistan is fighting Jammu and Kashmir to take it simply because they say that no, Muslim majority area cannot be with Bharat. You heard the other day, the general who says that Pakistan was created on the basis of Kalma, and the Kalma mandates that we must take the Kashmir back. And what happened when Pakistan captured, and they were allowed to capture and retain POK? 15 lakhs Hindus and Sikhs, those who were there in POK. What happened to them? Mirpur and other areas were completely massacred. Nearly 1 lakh of them, they came somehow, escaped to Jammu. When they escaped to Jammu, till the other day, they remained homeless. They couldn't buy a piece of land. They were members of Jammu and Kashmir, undivided Jammu and Kashmir. Their only fault was that they were not Muslims. Their children were not allowed to get a job in Jammu and Kashmir state government. They had no ration card. They couldn't buy land. They lived in the most terrible conditions. Why? What was their fault? And what the governments were doing? Just for the sake of vote through appeasement, governments after governments have been denying the reality, which has brought this whole situation to a pass where our people have difficulty in even remembering and they have audacity to ask, why are we talking about it? Pakistan created a wing of their own military, what is called jihadi wing. Some people, our people were made to believe by our own people that, no, they are all terrorist jihadis, they are not entirely. They are part, my friends, they are part of Pakistan military establishment. They have created this jihadi force to fight and take the Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir to Pakistan. And there were people in Jammu and Kashmir, Jamaat-e-Islami, which was patronized by this government sitting in Delhi. Instead of taking harsh action against them, they were patronized and pampered. And they prospered. They kept inflicting wounds after wound. The latest is Pahalgam. But times have changed. When Pahalgam they got the taste of it through Operation Sindoor. And I don't think they will ever be in the same mind doing it. But that's not all. That's not all. In the Eastern Front, East Bengal, East Pakistan and Bangladesh, they have always looked upon entire eastern part of Bharat as their Lebensraum, as their natural living space. And the demographic invasion that was happening in the northeast, Assam, Bengal, and Simanchal of Bihar, all this Kishanganj, Purnia, Katihar, Araria, this demographic invasion is like a time bomb. Western Assam, there is a movement that it should go to Bangladesh. There is a movement, they say, because we are large in number and we cannot live with kafirs. We must go to our people. In Dhubri, the movement is on. And we are thinking as if partition is over. No, it is not over. Attempts to partition India, Bharat, is a work in progress. And it is important that we must be aware of it. And so, what is the way forward? What do we do about it? We just cannot just remember it and be at it, leave it at that. We have to take certain steps. And the first step is talk about it, discuss about it. Let there be awareness about it, because our people have not been told, 3 generations have not been told the horror of partition. And the fact that partition wounds are still bleeding. They are bleeding in Jammu and Kashmir, they are bleeding in the eastern part of Bharat. Even now, the people, those of our people, those who are in Bangladesh, anything that happens, any turmoil that happens, they are the first victim. Why? Because they are not Muslims, and so they are victims. Reality has to be accepted. So we must talk about partition and the fact that threat of partition. What happened? What trauma, what tragedy it caused, and how it is an ongoing phenomenon. We must reject the very notion of anyone who talks the concept of kafir. Bharat does not believe in kafir. If anyone talks about kafir and hatred and distance from kafir, they have no place in Bharat. We must reject it. We cannot allow that to happen. When the textbooks are teaching, here in our neighboring state, matter went to Kerala High Court, Cochin High Court. Some enlightened citizens took the matter. Look, here are schools where the textbooks are being taught how to keep distance from others. These things must be rejected. Voice must be raised. Democratic and constitutional manner. It has no place in Bharat. Those who say that Sharia is above the Constitution of India, they have no place in Bharat. There is no question of any such idea or any such ideology. Constitution of Bharat is the supreme. There cannot be any other act above it. But there are people who have the audacity to say that no, Sharia is above, we will not accept it. And whole society remains quiet. Why? friends, we also must talk more and more about certain aspects of Constitution that talks about Bharat and where the soul of Bharat rests. Directive principles, nobody talks about. Fundamental duties, which talks about nation, nationalism, freedom movement, values of freedom movement, national song, national anthem, national flag, nobody talks about. Fundamental rights, everyone talks about. Entire jurisprudence of Bharat, High Court to Supreme Court, almost 75 to 80% is only about fundamental right. Nobody talks about fundamental duties. Nobody talks about directive principles. It is the directive principles that where the soul of Bharat lies, is the fundamental duties which can protect the soul. We must talk. We must discuss. Unfortunately, even in law school, law colleges, I have met many young lawyers. I have visited law university. I'm a chancellor of law university. I have been visiting the law colleges. They just draw blank about it. Directive, yes, there is a directive principle. No. I think we cannot let this situation continue. Today, we have problems. We have threats. Threats external and internal both. External, we know on both sides. East and the West, there are both the countries. They believe that they must grab the part of Bharat. Eastern flank wants to take away Assam, Bengal, and Simachal, Bihar. And West, of course, Jammu and Kashmir. They will not succeed, that's a different matter. But we cannot just leave the entire responsibility to our armed forces. As a citizen, it's our responsibility to be conscious, to be aware of it, to be alert about it. So we must talk about partition, must talk about the horror of partition. We must talk about the bleeding wounds of partition, which is bleeding even today. We must talk about the ongoing attempts at partition. We must take pride in who we are. And those advices, those directions are there in the directive principle and fundamental duties of our Constitution. There are viruses within as well. Those who are dividing us in the name of caste, creed, language, region, they are weakening our immunity. One says that no, we will have a homeland separate. Other is weakening the immunity of our body. We read in the newspaper that some senior leaders of a neighboring state has felt very bad about it. How can you talk about partition and horror of partition? I can understand his pains because he believes in an ideology that doesn't believe in a nation, that Bharat is a nation. For him and his people, there are only two kinds of people in the world, rich and poor, and they must continue fighting with each other. That's all. They have no concept of nation. So when you talk about nation and partition of a nation, it's something which is absurd to him. He would not like that to happen, to people to talk about it. So I think this day it is a solemn day. It's a day with somber remembrance and taking cognizance of how things are today so that we can be safe tomorrow. And as we know that as our country is rising, till 10 years back, there was no problem. Now there is a problem. Till 10 years back, the whole world was condemning us. India, not actually condemning, but they were pitying us, looking at us as the marginal people. Bharat, India will not grow economically. India will grow only at Hindu rate of growth. That is how they will grow. Today, for the last 5 years, when Bharat is the fastest growing large economy, And when we have 11th, 10th, 11th, we have come to the 4th and we are going to be the 3rd largest economy. When the world is looking at us, especially the global south looks at Bharat as their voice, many people, many countries would not like it to happen. Now we have, it is our duty to remain united, to ensure that Constitution is respected, constitutional values are supreme, universal brotherhood, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the principle that we have adopted is our soul. And we must make Bharat a Viksit Bharat, a self-reliant Bharat in the next 2 decades. That's the only way. And that is a place and a commitment that we must take on this day. I'm sure our young people will do it. They are already doing it. If the country is rising today, it's rising on the power of the youth, power of the women. It is their power which is catapulting us from nowhere to somewhere high and mighty in the sky. Friends, thank you very much for being a part of it. And I would expect that hereafter we must do it in all the institutions every year. And that way I will see that universities and colleges, they do it hereafter. They will do it. Thank you very much. Jai Bharat.
We now request the Honorable Governor and the distinguished dignitaries on dais to join us in witnessing the cultural performance by Central Bureau of Communication. The day, known as Partition Horrors Remembrance Day, serves as a solemn occasion to remember and commemorate the countless lives lost and individuals displaced as a result of the nation's partition. This tragic event led to one of the most significant mass migrations in history. Families were torn apart, forced to leave behind their ancestral homes and start anew as refugees. Partition Horrors Remembrance Day serves as a stark reminder of the importance of eradicating social divisions and disharmony while also promoting unity, social cohesion, and empowerment. In this spirit, we present to you a poignant dance drama as a tribute to those who suffered during this tumultuous period in our nation's history.
தெய்வங்கள், குருக்கள், தீர்க்க தரிசிகளின் நாடு இது. ரிஷிகள் மற்றும் முனிவர்கள் தவம் புரிந்த பூமி இது. துணிவும் வீரமும் மிகுந்த போர் வீரர்களின் இந்த நிலம் அனைத்து நாகரிகங்களையும் மத வழிமுறைகளையும் உள்ளடக்கியது. ஆகையால் இந்த நிலத்தின் மண்வாசத்தில் கூட இவை அனைத்தும் கலந்து இனிமையான நறுமணம் இன்றளவிலும் காணப்படுகிறது. இந்நிலத்தில் பாயும் நதிகளும் ஓடும் ஆறுகளும் சத்தியம், அகிம்சை மற்றும் பரஸ்பர சகோதரத்துவத்தை செய்திகளாய் உணர்த்துகிறது. வரலாற்றை புரட்டி பார்க்கையில் ஒன்று நன்றாக நமக்கு விளங்குகிறது. ஜஹாங்கீர் என்ற ஒரு அரசரின் ஆணையால் 200 ஆண்டுகால அடிமைத்தனம் நமக்கு கிடைத்தது. 1000 ஆண்டுகால பழமை வாய்ந்த இந்த பண்பாட்டையும் நாகரிகத்தையும் ஆங்கிலேயர்கள் சுக்குநூறாக உடைக்க அரும்பாடுபட்டனர். எனினும் இந்த கலாச்சார கோட்டையில் ஆங்கிலேயர்கள் ஒவ்வொரு கற்களை சிதைக்க முற்பட்ட போதும் தாய்நாட்டிற்காக உயிர் நீத்த தியாகிகள் இடர்கற்களாகவும் சிம்ம சொப்பனமாகவும் திகழ்ந்து ஆங்கிலேயர்களின் முயற்சிகளை தவிடுபொடியாக்கினர்.
लाल कमल और रोटी ने जो चिंगारी सुलगाई थी, भड़क उठी वो आग की अंग्रेजी सत्ता थर्राई थी। कुर्बान करे जैसे शम्मा पे परवाने, जैसे शम्मा पे परवाने। हिंदुस्तानी तलवारों के पानी में रंग दिखलाया, चली गोलियां मंगल पांडे काल फिरंगी बन आया। टोपे नाना साहेब लंका शाह, लक्ष्मीबाई ताते टोपे नाना साहेब लंका शाह। चौतरफा से मार करे कि भगे फिरंगी मिले नरा, भगे फिरंगी मिले नरा। करता वतन सलाम बारहा, करता वतन सलाम बारहा। जिंदाबाद शहीदे कौम, जिंदाबाद शहीदे कौम, जिंदाबाद शहीदे कौम, जिंदाबाद शहीदे कौम, जिंदाबाद शहीदे कौम।
பிறகு என்ன? இந்த நாட்டின் துணிச்சலான புதல்வர்கள் ஆங்கிலேய ஆட்சியாளர்களுக்கு எதிராக போர் பிரகடனத்தினை செய்து நாட்டின் நாற்புறமும் உறக்கத்தில் இருந்த எல்லோரையும் தட்டி எழுப்பினார்கள்.
பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு, பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு எங்கள் பாரத நாடு, எங்கள் பாரத நாடு. பாருக்குள்ளே நல்ல நாடு எங்கள் பாரத நாடு. ஞானத்திலே பரமோனத்திலே உயர் மனத்திலே பாரத நாடு எங்கள் பாரத நாடு.
கடைசியில் நாட்டிற்காக உயிர் நீத்த தியாகிகளின் முன்னே ஆங்கிலேய அரசு தலைவணங்கத்தான் வேண்டியிருந்தது. 1947 ஆண்டு ஆகஸ்ட் 15 அன்று அடிமைத்தனத்தின் அனைத்து சங்கிலிகளும் உடைக்கப்பட்டு நாம் சுதந்திர காற்றை சுவாசித்தோம்.
कितने बरस हुए कि हमने किस्मत से एक बाजी लगाई थी, एक इकरार किया था, प्रतिज्ञा की थी. अब वक्त आया कि हम उसको पूरा करें.
இளைய பாரதம் எழுகவே புது உலக காவியம் எழுதவே மலையெனும் தோள்கள் எழுகவே புது மாற்றம் தோன்றிட வருகவே இளைய பாரதம் எழுகவே எங்கள் இந்தியா இது எங்கள் இந்தியா எங்கள் இந்தியா இது எங்கள் இந்தியா.
ஆனால் சுதந்திரத்தின் பெருமகிழ்ச்சியினை தேசத்தின் பிரிவினை என்னும் சூழ்ச்சி பிடுங்கிக் கொண்டு போனது.
ये मेरे गुलशन में क्या हो रहा है, भाई से भाई जुदा हो रहा है.
नहीं साथ रहना तुम्हें गर जरूरी, नहीं साथ रहना तुम्हें गर जरूरी, दिल से न जाओ बढ़े लाख दूरी.
जहाँ भी रहो बस सलामत रहो तुम हमारे लिए दिल की राहत बनो तुम.
பிரிவினையின் வலியை படிப்படியாக நாம் ஏற்றுக்கொள்ள பழகினோம். முன்னேற்றத்திற்கான புதிய பாதைகளை வகுத்து வெற்றிக்கான இலக்குகளை அமைக்கத் தொடங்கினோம். இதற்கிடையில் பல்வேறு இடர்பாடுகளையும் நாம் கடக்கத்தான் வேண்டியிருந்தது. அகிம்சையின் பிறப்பிடமான நம் நாட்டில் பலமுறை போரின் கொடூரங்களையும் நாம் சந்திக்க வேண்டியிருந்தது.
जयतु जयतु भारतम्, जयतु जयतु भारतम्.
विश्व प्रेम की ओर चदरिया जागा हुआ भारत है ये. विश्व प्रेम की ओर चदरिया सच्चे सुर में गाता है.
एक सुरीली आशा लेकर सूरज नए उगाता है.
विश्व বিশ্ব প্রেমের চাদরে ঢেকে সত্যের সুরে গান গায় செந்தமிழ் வானில் புதிய பொன்விடியில் ஆயிரமாதவன் தோன்றிடுதே
विश्व प्रेमाची ओढून चादर खऱ्या सुरांनी गात आहे.
एक सुरीली आशा लईने सूरज नवो गाड़े जे जागा हुआ भारत है ये, जागा हुआ भारत है ये. जय तो भारतम, जय तो भारतम. वसुधैव कुटुम्बकम भारतम. जय तो भारतम. जय तो भारतम. जय तो भारतम. वसुधैव कुटुम्बकम. जय तो भारतम. खोलेंगे
नहीं आए, लिख देंगे.
आशाएं. जय तो भारतम.
We thank Central Bureau of Communication for a performance that captures the essence of the powerful message of the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day. We now request the respected Principal Secretary to the Honorable Governor, Thiruvar Kirosh Kumar IAS, to propose the words of thanks.
And privilege to convey our heartfelt gratitude as we gather to observe the Partition Horrors Remembrance Day. First and foremost, I extend my deepest gratitude to our Honorable Governor for presiding over and guiding us throughout the event. I extend my heartfelt thanks to our chief guest, Thiru Sanjeev Sanyal, Member Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister, whose presence and insightful reflections have so meaningfully enriched today's commemoration. I also wish to extend our sincere thanks to our two distinguished guest speakers, Thiru J.K. Aroda and Professor Amarjeet Singh Narang, whose words and perspectives have helped us reflect on the lessons of history and broaden our understanding of the era's impact and its enduring lessons. We are grateful to the director of IIT Madras and his dedicated team for their invaluable support in providing the venue and seamless logistics, ensuring the event's smooth execution. Our thanks to the Central Bureau of Communication, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India for curating the cultural program and organizing the exhibition. I want to thank each of you, our audience, for your involvement and your commitment to remembering those who were affected by our partition and strengthening our resolve to build a harmonious society. I would like to thank our friends from the press and media. Nandri Vanakkam.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now humbly request all of you to kindly rise up for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलति तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष माहे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Dear friends, we humbly request all of you to join us for the high tea at the 6th floor. We request our staff members to kindly escort our dignitaries to the refreshment center at the 7th floor. The other dignitaries, we request you to join us for the high tea in the 6th floor. The Honorable Governor, We request the students also to join us for the high tea in the 6th floor. The Honorable Governor and our other dignitaries on the dais and our other VIP dignitaries will be